all, and welcome to Stingray Tom's Florida and another deeper dive into the archive. This is part 3 of my look at the Florida tourism iceberg. As a refresher, iceberg charts start above the surface with subjects almost everyone knows and get more obscure as you follow the iceberg into the depths. I've put one together on Florida's attractions, and today I'll be wrapping up the chart and looking at the 3 tiers that represent the attractions, which are typically known to locals and others who are intrepid explorers of the Sunshine State. There's some real gems in this part of the chart, and I hope you'll check them out if you haven't before. Please watch the first and second parts of this mini-series, but you don't need to watch them before this one. Also, as I mentioned in the other parts, each of the attractions are open as of 2024. If your favorite didn't make the list, no worries. Tell us about it in the comments.
Marjorie Keenan Rawlings State Park. Dedicated to one of the many important writers to call Florida home, the park features Rawlings' homestead and farm she owned in the early 20th century. She moved into the traditional dog trot style house built in 1884 and began writing fiction. Surrounded by an orange grove, she'd managed the small farm while making stories, often fictionalized accounts of her neighbors, publishing stories and books between 1931 and 1955, and winning a Pulitzer Prize for The Yearling. Fort Matanzas National Monument. Monuments are smaller than national parks, and this one on the Atlantic coast just south of St. Augustine is only 100 acres. Sitting on a couple barrier islands, its focal point is Fort Matanzas. That's really a fortified tower. Completed by 1742, it's 50-foot square and 30 feet high, and yes, 18th century Spain used measurements that were nearly identical to ours. The fort protected a backdoor route to St. Augustine, with its only enemy engagement happening just after its completion. It repelled a British invasion force of 12 warships. House of Refuge at Gilbert's Bar. Located on one of the narrowest points of Hutchinson Island, yet another barrier island, it was built in 1876 as part of a line of 12 life-saving stations along the Atlantic. Operated by the U.S. Life Saving Service, a predecessor to the Coast Guard, it was literally a house of refuge for shipwreck survivors and was outfitted with beds, provisions, and basic first aid to keep sailors alive along what was once a very lonely coast. Payne's Prairie Preserve State Park. Located not far from the home of Marjorie Keenan Rawlings, this is a rather magical landform. It's a shallow savanna that's drained by the Alachua Sink, which got its name from the Alachua Ranch, 87 square miles that accounted for 1/3 of the cattle in Spanish Florida. The indigenous population understood the land. They knew it flooded, creating a lake, and then drained away, sometimes taking a few years. Chua is a Timucua language word that means sinkhole. Today, it's home of wild bison and feral horses. Micanopy. This is a small town located on the southern edge of Payne's Prairie. Known as the town that time forgot, it's the oldest community in the state's interior, the first town settled after Florida became part of the U.S. in 1821, and it was connected to America's first Jewish communal settlement. For the past 150 years, its population has stayed constant at around 600 in a state that has grown 250 times larger. Little has changed in 100 years, with the faded town center showing its age and specializing in antique shops. Florida Southern College. If you're unfamiliar with this Lakeland college, you might wonder why it's a tourist attraction. But FSC is the most architecturally important campus in the U.S. Its collection of Frank Lloyd Wright buildings is the largest in the world, one of America's most influential architects and probably its most controversial. Wright designed a campus with a dozen structures built between 1938 and 1958, and to Wright's exacting and eccentric plans. Thousands of people visit FSC every year to explore the architectural wonder. Atathiki Museum. Opened in 1997 on the Big Cypress Indian Reservation at the northern edge of the Everglades, this terrific museum has about 200,000 items in its archive, making it one of the largest indigenous American collections in the U.S. Dedicated to telling the history of the Seminole tribe, it has both a traditional museum displaying artifacts as well as a 1-mile walk through a cypress dome that leads to a recreated Everglades-style Seminole village. Fort Mose State Park. The term fort is a bit of a misnomer for this settlement, known by the Spanish as Gracia Real de Santa Teresa de Mose. Located just north of St. Augustine, Mose was a free black town in Spanish Florida. Officially established by the governor in 1738, it was the first free black community in North America. The people living there were escaped enslaved individuals from British colonies. They became Spanish citizens, served in its militia, and worked in and traded with St. Augustine. Highlands Hammock State Park. Opened in 1931, it's one of the Florida state parks that predated the park system. The large and popular park encompasses several of Florida's habitats like old-growth bald cypress swamp, pine uplands, and Florida scrubland. Highlands Hammock is one of the best places in the state to experience its nature and wildlife with great trails, a tram tour, and a campground. Washington Oaks Gardens State Park. Donated to the state in 1965, the park contains undeveloped Atlantic coast property and a garden setting along the Matanzas River. The grounds were developed starting in 1936 as a winter home with formal gardens and a citrus grove. Like Highland Hammock, Washington Oaks contains several habitats including beach dunes and scrubland, tidal marsh, and coastal hammock. Tarpon Springs. I admit that Tarpon Springs is my favorite town in Florida. It's a major tourist destination because of its history of sponge diving and the town's vibrant Greek community. The main tourist area along Dodecanese Boulevard is filled with interesting shops selling sponges and other Florida items, the old sponge docks with colorful boats containing sponges, and lots of restaurants. There's no better place for traditional Greek food outside of the home country. Harry P. Lou Gardens. Owned by the city of Orlando, Lou Gardens is a sleeper of an attraction in the middle of a city that's better known for Disney. While the large botanical gardens were developed by the Lou's starting in 1936, the property was first settled in 1858 by Angeline and David Mizell. The Mizels built the home in 1888, and tours are offered daily. The Mizels are even buried there, in the only family graveyard left in Orlando. Potter's Wax Museum. Heading back to St. Augustine, we can visit at one of its earliest attractions. Opened in 1948 by George Potter, a man who fell in love with London, England's Madame Tussauds Wax Museum. Years later, he chose the nation's oldest city in which to open America's first wax museum. It was immediately popular, and while its current collection is smaller than in the past, it's a cool part of Florida's tourism history. Mount Dora. Known as the Festival City, the community on the shore of Lake Dora was founded in 1880 and has become one of the most popular destinations in the state. Like Tarpon Springs, a large part of Mount Dora's economy comes from tourists. There's a large number of antique shops, gift shops, and restaurants along with festivals every month, and the lake is popular for boating and fishing. And remember to get your own I Climbed Mount Dora bumper sticker. Mary McLeod Bethune Home. Located on the campus of Bethune-Cookman University in Daytona Beach, this was the home of Bethune between 1913 and 1955. She was an important black educator, civil rights leader, and founder of the university. The house and grounds are open for tours, plus visitors can view her gravesite. For Bethune, the elephants you see are a symbol of Africa and a sign of strength and community. Tallahassee Museum. Opened in 1962, it's not what you expect when you think of a museum. There's no building filled with display cases. Instead, it's a rural, 52-acre open-air facility which includes a small zoo, a replica farm, a plantation house, and other period structures, as well as walking trails and a cypress swamp. It's a favorite of school groups, but is interesting to adults as well, as it tells the story of life in Florida's Big Bend region. Audubon House. Key West is famous for authors, but there's at least one remarkable artist that visited the distant island. Built between 1846 and 49, this was the home of Captain John Geiger, Key West's first harbor pilot, at a time when Key West was the most populous city in Florida. While the house is part of history, it was the garden that attracted John James Audubon. Exploring the Keys and Tortugas in 1832, he used the garden of native and imported plants in his images of local birds. Crystal River Archaeological State Park. This area on the west coast was occupied by indigenous people for 1,600 years, ending just after the arrival of the Spanish. As one of the most significant U.S. archaeological sites, the 61-acre park is home to a 6-mound complex that began some 2,300 years ago. It was part of a trade network that extended to the Ohio River, and about 1,500 people are buried on the site, which also contained a village and ceremonial center. It's estimated that 7,500 people would visit the site annually. Reptile World Serpentarium. George Van Horn has the most dangerous profession in a Florida attraction. He milks snakes. That means he handles deadly venomous snakes and has them express their venom into a container. The result is sent to labs to make antivenom, which saves the lives of thousands of people. Horn does the milking most days in front of an audience at the small facility, which also displays many snake species as well as gators, turtles, and lizards. Medieval Torture Museum. Housed in an unassuming building in St. Augustine, this is one of the most intense museums in the state. It's not for the faint of heart, for contained in several rooms, dimly lit with lights approximating candlelight, are dozens of reproductions of torture devices along with poor souls showing their use. Opening in 2017, the Torture Museum doesn't really seem out of place, along with Ripley's Believe It or Not, a pirate museum, and a number of ghost tours. Brevard Zoo. Located in Melbourne, this medium-sized zoo is one of the newer in the state. It opened in 1994 and has about 200 species. The zoo is popular with locals, and it's the only one within a 2-hour drive. One of its unique features is a guided kayak tour on the waterway that allows visitors to glide past a number of animal habitats. They have a herd of Maasai giraffes, which aren't very common in U.S. zoos, and there's an active breeding program for them. Gulf Specimen Marine Lab. One of the most unusual zoos in Florida specializes in some of the smallest sea life. Created by the marine biologist Jack Rudlow in 1963, its original purpose was to supply animals to universities and other researchers. That's still a part of its work today, but many people also head to Panacea to explore all the unusual specimens in the aquariums, ponds, and touch tanks and learn about the rich sea life in the Gulf. Kingsley Plantation. One of the earliest and largest cotton plantations operating in North Florida was owned by Zephaniah Kingsley and included 750 acres of Fort George Island. Today it's part of the National Park Service's Timucuan Preserve. Originally from England, Kingsley lived in Florida for 25 years and operated as a slave merchant as well as a planter. Today, the historic site features the 1797 plantation house, the oldest in Florida, as well as a large number of slave cabins. Bulow Plantation Ruins State Park. Yet another plantation, this time one that grew cotton, indigo, and sugarcane. Bulow encompassed 4,600 acres near modern-day Flagler Beach. Founded in 1821 by Charles Bulow and his son John, it became the largest plantation in East Florida. Like Kingsley, it was successful due to the forced labor of dozens or even hundreds of enslaved people. Today the park displays the ruins of the sugar mill that processed cane syrup into sugar. The plantation was destroyed in 1836 during the Seminole War. Rainbow Springs State Park. Like Weeki Wachee and Silver Springs, this was an early attraction built around one of Florida's many springs. The springs feed the Rainbow River, which feeds into the Withlacoochee River. The attraction was developed in the 1930s and featured gardens with artificial waterfalls, as well as submarine boats that allowed visitors to view the spring head through windows on the side and bottom of the boats. This was similar to Silver Springs. Charles Morse Museum. Founded by Jeanette and Hugh McKean, the Winter Park Museum is named for Jeanette's grandfather. It got its start at Rollins College, though today it's located off campus. It's similar to the Dali Museum in that it's primarily dedicated to the work of one artist, Louis Comfort Tiffany. Tiffany primarily worked in stained glass and was the son of the founder of Tiffany and Company. The Morse Museum holds the world's largest collection of Tiffany's works. Seaside. Moving into the lowest level on the iceberg, we're taking a look at our last city, one that's the most unusual in the state. Developed in 1978, it's a planned community as Robert and Darrell Davis wanted a beach resort that was a throwback to earlier times. It has a strict set of design and planning rules and is based on the design style New Urbanism, which influenced both the City of Celebration and Orlando's Baldwin Park neighborhood. Seaside became nationally famous when it was featured in the movie The Truman Show. Madeira Bickle Mound State Archaeological Site. Named for the owner of the site, who donated the land to the state in 1948, it's one of the smallest state parks at only 10 acres. It's the first to have been designated as an indigenous archaeological site with evidence of 2,000 years of human occupation and being an important ceremonial site for the local Tocobaga community. There's 2 indigenous mounds in the park, including one 20-foot high with a footprint of 17,000 square feet. Venetian Gardens. In 1938, the Works Progress Administration, a New Deal program created during the Great Depression, began work on developing the park. Located on Lake Harris in Leesburg, the WPA created a city park on swampy land. The park features 6 small islands linked with bridges over a series of canals. It's popular with locals and should be better known by visitors because of its beauty and the large amount of wildlife that can be viewed. Orman House Historic State Park. Located in Apalachicola, this house and surrounding property were part of the land owned by Thomas Orman starting in 1838. The plantation house is one of the finest examples of its kind in Florida. Orman was a successful cotton merchant in the Apalachicola Basin. The park also includes an early structure once used as slave quarters, as well as a small garden that has cotton plants and vegetables. Lake Okeechobee. Known as the Big O because of its shape, Okeechobee is the largest lake in Florida and the second largest freshwater lake in the lower 48 states behind Lake Michigan. It measures 720 square miles, but only has an average depth of 9 feet. It's fed by the Kissimmee River and used to empty into the Everglades. Since the 1920s, large canals have been built that provide drinking water to much of the southeast Florida. Okeechobee is one of the most popular lakes in the entire U.S. for sport fishing. Oscar Scherer State Park. Established in 1956, the park was originally the property of Elsa Scherer Burroughs, who donated her 460-acre ranch to the state in her will, requesting the park be named after her father. In 1992, the park tripled in size with the donation of the adjacent Palmer Ranch. The park contains pine scrub, hardwood hammock, and Florida scrubland, making it a great place to spot gopher tortoises, snakes, bald eagles, and the endangered Florida scrub jay. Solomon's Castle. Located in rural Hardee County, this property has been welcoming visitors from soon after it started to be transformed by artist and inventor Howard Solomon in the early 1970s. It's currently owned and managed by Solomon's daughter Elaine, who's continued to develop the property. The house is clad in aluminum printing plates, and the interior contains dozens of pieces of Howard's fanciful and intriguing artwork. The site also has an antique car collection and a whimsical pirate ship containing a restaurant. Big Tree Park. Home of the Senator and Lady Liberty, this Seminole County park opened in 1927 when Florida State Senator Moses Overstreet donated the swampland. Sadly, in 2012, the Senator, a massive cypress, was the victim of arson and destroyed. Before that, the remarkable tree was 125 feet tall and 35 feet in circumference, making it the largest bald cypress in the U.S. The Senator was about 3,500 years old, making it the 12th oldest tree in the world. Lady Liberty is its sister tree, located nearby, and is about 2,000 years old, 82 feet tall, and 32 feet around. Fantasy of Flight. The home of the vintage aircraft collection owned by Kermit Weeks, many of which are still capable of flight, is located between Tampa and Orlando. It's one of the largest and most diverse collections of its kind. Weeks, a highly skilled pilot, owns non-jet propelled planes that include military models from both world wars as well as commercial aircraft. Audubon Center for Birds of Prey. This center is located in Maitland and officially opened in 1979. Operated by the Florida Audubon Society, the facility treats more than 800 sick or injured birds every year. It's open to the public, and visitors can view recuperating birds of prey as well as those that are permanent residents due to injuries that have healed but make it impossible to live in the wild. It's one of the best places in the state to view eagles, hawks, ospreys, vultures, kites, owls, and other raptors. Winter Park Scenic Boat Tour. The Winter Park area has 5 lakes that are connected with a series of narrow canals. The canals were originally used to float timber to sawmills. Beginning in 1938, a boat tour has operated on the lakes with its dock on Lake Osceola. The tour tells the history of the area while showing visitors the large lakefront homes, Rollins College campus on Lake Virginia, and Kraft Azalea Park on Lake Maitland. Cassadaga. Located near Deltona, this is a quiet community that's considerably different from any other in the state. The name comes from a Seneca language word that means water underneath the rocks. Officially known as the Cassadaga Spiritualist Camp, it was founded in 1875. It currently has 55 homes along with a church and meeting hall and is dedicated to religious spiritualism. To further that focus, the community has about 30 spiritualists who are available for healing and/or spiritualist mediumship. Devil's Mill Hopper Geological State Park. Named after the top part of a mill, which feeds grain into the millstones, the unusual formation is a 500-foot wide and 120-foot deep sinkhole. Unlike most that form in Florida, this one didn't fill with water. Instead, early white settlers to the area discovered the bones of hundreds of animals at the bottom and imagined the animals falling in on their way to hell, thereby giving the geologic formation the name Devil's Millhopper. The state park opened in 1974, and a staircase that led to the base of the sinkhole was built.
So that's the end of the iceberg chart and this video. Thank you for watching another of my videos. Please hit the like button and subscribe in order to learn more about Florida tourism history. Stingray Tom's Florida, traveling through time around the Sunshine State.